and I was always in the minority. And so I worked with Republicans who were open to this idea and shared with people who heretofore hadn't been open to it, and tried to reach into their lives to understand if any of them had any sensitivity for developmentally disabled people. And so when I'd find those, and then I would share my ideas to them. And in Congress, there was a person who, in the House Education Labor Committee by the name of John Bradamus from Indiana. And we began just battling each other on our ideas on television. And then one day, he asked me to come to his office, and Hans Kung from the Netherlands was there, who was a Catholic priest who is at odds with his church to some extent in his theology, and just sitting down with him, and then John Bradamus and I started talking about these ideas and our spiritual responsibilities as well, and that began my connection with the Democrat side of the aisle as well. And so that's the way it was. There's some other things that went into that, like which I love to tell. As I talked to the chair of the new chair of the committee, and Carl Perkins of Kentucky. So in order to understand him, he had 23 Tennessee Walker horses in Kentucky that nobody was doing anything with. They're just running wild. So I said to him, I'll go down on the Easter recess instead of going back to my district, take 2 of my sons and I'll train your horses for you. So I went down there, and he sent somebody to see if I knew what I was doing, and he said back, he said, he sure does. And so I trained him so well that Carl gave me a yearling Tennessee walking horse just in return for it. And so, because I learned how horses talk, communicate with them as well, with each other. And so what I then talked to Carl, and I said, our trouble in our committee is we're constantly at odds with each other because we got these straight line rows of seats and 2 tiers. And so in order to talk to somebody else, you have to turn your head 90 degrees. And in order to, if you're at less seniority, you got to turn all the way around to talk to a person of seniority. I said, if we could all look at each other's eyes like we did once over in that other building on the lower end. And so he then thought that through and built a diamond-shaped table that 35 people would sit around, and all of us could look into each other's eyes. That was when we began developing legislation that both Republicans and Democrats could support. The issues, as we were developing that first piece of legislation, which went by a number of them instead of IDEA as it is now, it was 94-142, it was pretty well picked up, the concept, because not only Washington and Minnesota, but some other states had picked it up. And Pennsylvania, a case had been taken to the courts, and they ruled that it was mandatory that school districts would have to provide special education for those who needed it. However, the courts don't provide any money. And so that was the one part, is that we needed to do it, and we needed to do what it was possible for us to do. And so we, at that time, it was did not reach as far as it did later with learning disabilities. And so one of the issues that I was concerned with that is it was going to cost more money than the Congress had ever put up. Normally, I would have voted against legislation like that, because I voted against Medicare, because I said to the Mayo Clinic people, eventually it will break this country in its costs, which we're facing now. But I was so passionate to help the developmentally disabled that I said, I'm going to let that principle go aside in order to get this legislation through. And so now I feel that the Congress, since it's never put up more than 19% of the cost of that legislation, that they're still wrong. You're still wrong. You ought to fund it and find ways to fund that and not put all that burden on the state. The state has enough burden on a number of other education responsibilities that we have here. In Congress, when I looked at that group, what we call the learning disabled, and that was a tough fight. And you know you have an influence when In the committee, it went through by one vote, in the Education Labor Committee. On the floor of the House, it went through with one vote. In the Senate, they did not include it. In conference, it went through with one vote, and we got it enacted. And the people who fought it were the ones already who had their money coming to them because they figured that you shouldn't include them and take money away. That if you only realize, if you reach out to other people and die to yourself, you gain yourself as well.